It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you tonight to our event honoring Daughters of Latin America. It's a book presentation of an anthology created, imagined, and brought to fruition by Sandra Guzman. And yes. So the plan is to just have a plática, just a conversation. Sandra will tell us a little bit about the origin of the idea, how she came to it, what she did to make it happen. And then we will each read a little bit from it. Our other speaker here is Natalia Trigo, who drove in today, no, last night, before the rain. So she made it here and she's in the book also and will be sharing. And I have a piece in the book as well, so I'll also be reading. So without much more, Sandra, te lo paso.
Thank you,
I
Norma.
think que sí se oye, ¿no?
¿Se oye?
Sí.
Porque yo puedo alzar la voz bien alta, ¿se oye bien? Okay. ¿En español o en inglés?
Probably English.
¿Inglés? Ah, bueno.
Or Spanglish.
Or Spanglish, okay. Thank you, Norma, for hosting us, for doing the work you do, for saying yes to the anthology. It's an honor to be in your presence.
Mutual.
I always like to begin my talks by thanking the indigenous people of the places where I visit and thanking them and honoring the ancestors. And so I honor my ancestors and I honor yours. My name is Sandra Guzman, and I am an Afro-Indigenous woman born in the Caribbean in a place called Boriquen, which is popularly known by its colonized name, Puerto Rico. Some of you may know Boriquen because Bad Bunny is really famous right now. And this is, for me, this book has been a gift in my life. It came to me as a project during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was quite remarkable to be in the company of so many astonishing writers and thinkers and thought leaders. The book was born out of a sister anthology called New Daughters of Africa, which is a book that's about 900 pages long, and it came out about 5 years ago, edited by I think she's a British black woman, and she was able to anthologize the work of 210 women in a book that's about 900 pages. And so when I got the contract, I only had 500 pages. I think I made it to like 600 though. I squeezed in a little bit. And the goal was to match the 210 women. I was able to, between the covers, gather the voices of 140 writers, thinkers, scholars, and I even was able to anthologize a phenomenal speech by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the very famous speech that she gave when she was called the B word in Congress. If you haven't read the speech, it's in the anthology, Google it. I thought it was really powerful and that it should be studied, including these two brilliant women, Natalia Trigo, and everybody knows, Norma Cantú. When I thought about the book, I would always think about, this is gonna sound kind of strange, and we talked a little bit about it. This is a very spiritual process to put together an anthology. You are in communion always with the writings of these women, and you're meeting them in the space where writers and readers meet, which is a very special spiritual space. You know when you're reading an author and you feel like you know them after you read them so long, and so this is what happened with the women. But I would often think, I would close my eyes and think, what do I want to do with this? And I would imagine us, all of us, the ancestors of the book and the contemporary writers, just gathered in a circle, and I would invite them to offer a gift, offer their medicine. And so, what can I tell you? There's about 24 languages in the book. Many of these languages are indigenous mother tongues of the Americas. I was startled and I was gutted when I heard a statistic that according to UNESCO, every 12 to 14 days, an indigenous language dies around the world. Every 12 to 14 days, an indigenous language dies around the world. And I thought about what happens when a language dies. You know, in Borique, our language was murdered by colonization. And it still exists in our everyday Spanish, you know, barbacoa, hamaca. So there's lots of indigenous words in the Spanish, like in the Spanish of all of the Americas. But I wanted to honor the women who are still writing in their ancient mother tongues in the Americas. And so that was one of my first inspirations. So I'm really happy to see that that the indigenous language systems of these women are side by side the English translations of the book. Another conceit, another intention was to lift the queer Latinas of the Americas, because queer Latinas have been marginalized, and so I felt it was really important to center the queer voices. So for example, I have a love letter. Like, I don't know if you all know, the only Latina who has won a Nobel Prize in Literature is Gabriela Mistral. We were hoping for Elena Poniatowska, who's on the short list, but she lived in the closet her entire life, and she was painted as a jamona, a spinster who was unhappy. And you read her letters, and she was having a good time. She had these lovers from all over the place. She was living her very queer life, behind the scenes. And I thought, how cool would it be to publish a letter? And so I found this beautiful letter that she wrote to her lover that I found in this book called Love Letters from Gabriela Mistral to Doris Dana, or something like that. So queer women were very much a part of the intentionality of centering their voices. And then the third group of women whose voices I wanted to center were the voices of Afro-Latinas, because we know that Afro-Latinas are marginalized. And in some countries, we don't even exist, according to some presidents. And so there were women that I didn't know about, like Virginia Brindis de Salas. I'd love to share her story because she is the first Afro-Latina published in South America, a great poet, and she was a contemporary of Gabriela Mistral. And there's, incredible poets from Cuba, like Nancy Morejon, who are still with us. There's ancestor poets. And the fourth group of women that I wanted to center were the voices of Puerto Rican women. Because Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, we are in a, don't believe that we're a territory or commonwealth. We are a colony. It's just that we're not taught that word, and language is very important. And we're in that liminal space of being, technically and legally part of the United States, but also we're very much Latinoamericanas, right? We are part of the Latin American world. And so when anthologies are created in Latin America, Puerto Rican women are usually left out because we're not part of Latin America in this, weird way of thinking about us. And then when anthologies are created in the United States, where, not just Puerto Ricans, but all Latinas are pretty much left out. And so I thought it was really important to center the voices of Puerto Rican women writers who are doing phenomenal work. And I will say that Latinas today are living a renaissance. Latina writers are living a renaissance. And this book certainly is only a snippet of the reflection of the brilliance that currently exists in our worlds. And what else do I want to say about the book? I want to also say that what I love about this book is and Carmen Bollosa is a Mexican poet, and she said a couple of weeks ago at the launch of the book in New York, she said, Sandra, lo que tú has creado es un país sin fronteras. What you have created is a borderless country. And it is a borderless country. It's a porous collection. And it's the way we were always. It's the way we have always been. It's the way that we have been since time immemorial. And so it gives me such joy to just to read the book and to see, like, 20th century poets hanging out with, a nun from the 17th century, Sor Juana, or 16th century, a journalist from the 18th century hanging out with a 21st century writer. There are essays in the book, and there's poetry in the book, there's memoir, there's history, there are letters, there's chants. And I'm gonna stop talking because I could talk all night about the beauty and the exquisiteness of the women who said yes. And I just personally want to publicly also thank Natalia, Trigo, for saying yes, and Norma, Cantú for saying yes. And then one last thing, this is a work of extraordinary literary translation art, because there are 18 languages here. So when we think about Latin America, we in the mainstream think that Latin America is a Spanish language region. But what we know, right, for real, is that it is the most multilingual, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural region of the world. And so I wanted to break down these imperialistic borders of defining us. And so there are Haitian women, there are Caribbean women from all the Caribe, and there's women from Trinidad and Guyana and Brazil. And so there's Portuguese, women write in Portuguese, in French, in English, in Dutch, in Spanish, in English, and in, Cachiquel, Quiche, in Quechua, in Wayu, in Uwa, in Miskito, and it, to me, it's the most authentic representation of what I think we are, this glorious mosaic of a people. So, and then one more thing, I just want to always shout out the translators, because many of these pieces had to be translated from Aymari or Cachiquel or the indigenous tongue to Spanish and then to English. So they traveled these linguistic portals, and for translators, I got a chance to translate a couple of the pieces. One word can keep you up at night for like 3 months, And so I just want to shout out my host for this trip, Dr. Gabriel Saxton Ruiz, who's sitting right there, and he's a Peruano, and he translated one of the best contemporary Peruvian voices right now, Claudia Jimenez Salazar. And so just as this book is just as the writers shine, I think the translators really came through. Yeah.
Gracias.
De nada.
The book is divided into 13 sections, and Natalia, you're going to read from your piece.
Yeah.
And could you talk about that section?
Oh,
or,
yes.
Or could you tell us
Yes.
the 13 sections?
Oh, yeah. So imagine this. I have 140 voices, and how am I going to organize these women? And I thought about, I think birthdays and, that would be boring, or genres would be boring. I mean, boring to me, like, and alphabetical order, please. So I was like, how am I going to do this? And I was sharing earlier today that I was in Boriquen, and I have a place in Luquillo now. Luquillo is in the northern eastern coast. It's right in front of the rainforest and in front of the ocean. So I said, okay, so I have everybody's texts, and I put them on the floor, and then the lights went out. Because in Puerto Rico, el apagón is real, right? So I lit all these candles, and I just kind of did this meditative, I felt like I was composing a song. But I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, and I remember meeting Luis, and he's an indigenous man from Vieques, which is Boriquen is made up of 143 islands or little islets, I think they're called. So we're an archipelago like Hawaii, and Vieques is one of the smaller islands. And he came to the big island and he was helping me renovate the apartment. And he says to me, "So, you're rematriating to the motherland?" And I said, "I am." And he says, "Do you know the language of the moon?" And I was like, "I don't know that. Who knows the language of the moon here? Raise your hand." Well, at some point in our ancestral lives, that's the language that we went by, because the moon, it rules everything, right? The waters, and we're like 70 to 80 something % water. So even if we don't realize it, the moon is giving us energy and controlling us. And the women and the people who have menstruation, right? They're also guided by that 28-day cycle. And so I began to really think hard about the moon. And then I talked to Lawrence Chamel, and I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but he's one of the translators, and he's out, he's a queer translator who lives in Barcelona, a Jewish poet. And he says to me, "Pero por supuesto tiene que ser la luna, Sandra." And I was like, well, two people just talked about the moon to me. And then I started researching a little bit more about the moon, and we realized that there are 13 moons in the year, not 12. And they're holy. And 13 is a sacred number in the Maya tradition. It's the holiest number. It's another name for God. And the human being has 13 major joints. And then we have 12 orifices. Men have 12 and women have 13. And the 13th orifice is the womb. So when I read that, and I was like, of course I have to divide this into 13. And so that's the story of the 13 moons and the number 13.
Gracias. And do you want
Awesome.
to read
Yes,
this?
I'm sorry. Every time I open the book, I'm like, oh, this person's also in the book. Wow. Yeah, it's just been such a privilege to be part of this anthology with so many other amazing writers.
Can you share a little bit about your work and introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about what it is.
Dr. Trigo comes
you.
to us from UT Arlington.
Yes. So I teach there. I'm also a writer, and I basically specialize in immigration and border literature. But that's the boring part. I've been writing for a while, I think, but I'm in I don't know if anyone here is anyone here a writer as well, or is delving into writing?
Several.
Well, I'm working on my very first novel, and that is like a very tedious and hard and amazing process. And I've written other stuff, short stories and essays and stuff, but I think I'm now in the process of writing a full book. So it's like birthing a child, definitely, with the pains and everything.
And she's being a little modest, but she's an award-winning writer.
Yes,
Yes,
that's right.
That's right.
Yes. Well, maybe you can tell them that's how I met Sandra, because I won the Aura Estrada Award, which is a prize for emerging women writers in the Americas. So you have to be under 30. When I applied, I won this right before the pandemic. And maybe you want to tell them a little bit of the story of Aura Estrada?
Sure. So as I was trying to find writers, I didn't do this anthology by myself. I mean, I did, but edited, and I was alone in my space and thinking about it. But this is a community project. Like, you cannot do an anthology of this breadth without the support of your community, of so many people who believe in the work of what we do as writers and editors and creatives. And I reached out to Francisco Goldman. I don't know if anybody here knows his work, but he's from Guatemala, and we were having a conversation about writers, and he gave me two names, and he said, you must reach out to Cristina Rivera Garza, who is doing phenomenal work, and she's a MacArthur genius, and She has written really beautifully about Mexico and women and femicide, and Grieving is one of my favorite books that she's, is it Grieving? Grief is one of my favorite books that she's written. And he said she's one day going to win the Nobel Prize if she keeps, if she keeps doing the work she does. And then he said in an emerging voice that you must reach out to is Natalia Trigo, who just won the Aura Estrada Award. Aura Estrada was his wife, and they were on vacation in the Pacific coast of Mexico, and she was killed in a tragic accident. A wave kind of hit her, and she fell the wrong way, and it was a tragic, awful thing that happened. She was working on her PhD, and she was a writer, and what I publish here is her the last story that she was working on, that he translated, and it just brings me so much joy that Aura's with us, right? I get goosebumps that she's with us. I think it makes her really happy that she's with us. Yeah, that's how I found Natalia.
Thanks for telling the story. You're a better storyteller in that way than I am. Okay, I'm gonna read from. I'll tell a little bit about the story of this piece. I had other stories, but I don't know. I felt like I needed to write something specifically for this book, and I wanted to write something different. So I didn't write about my identity. I didn't write, I wrote about, it's kind of a dark story, and I'm dwelling into this area. So the story is about a caregiver. She's taking care of an old lady, and the old lady is very obsessed with tarot cards. And so I'm gonna read an abstract from that. And I'll have to say, something I really love about this book is like, you allow people like me to just experiment on the page, and then you allow people like the majestic Norma and Cantú to talk about, Texas, and we all coincide and have a dialogue within the book, so you'll find all of these different voices. Okay, so Luisa throws the rest of the lentils into the sink and lets the water wash them down the drain. She puts a blood pressure pill on a napkin and brings Doña Maca a glass of water so she can swallow it. But the old lady ignores her. She says, for the new baby to survive, she'll have to get rid of someone, that it does her no good to carry the burden of another woman. Luisa turns to look at the purse she left on the armchair because she thinks the old lady might have been rummaging in it while she fixed the bed, but the purse doesn't seem to have moved. Look, pay attention to the card, the old lady continues, raising the tower card. Do you think this card lies? She asks, looking at her intently, and Luisa noticed the glassy pupils of the old lady, and she feels a chill running down her spine. Doña Maca, we're going to take your medicine. The old lady doesn't shift her gaze, and Luisa fears for Tamara, for Daniela, as if the old lady could hurt them. She takes a pill between her fingers, hoping the old lady will forget her reading. Take your pill, she says, rubbing Señora Maca's back as she does with her other patients. But the old lady resists. Go on, take it. She presses it against Doña Maca's lips. The old lady closes her lips and twists her head away as if it were a game. Please don't be like that, Doña Maca. The old lady responds she will swallow the pill only if Luisa picks another card. Nope, no more cards, Luisa replies. She doesn't want to listen to the old lady anymore. She just wants to finish the day as soon as possible and take her pay from the ceramic jar. She takes a few steps away, but when the old lady holds out the deck of cards, it becomes impossible to say no. She watches her hand move involuntarily, her fingers bumping into the old lady's hand, knuckles pulled tight under her skin. The hanged man. Doña Maca smiles and says, see? It was nothing. And Luisa leans against the table because she feels weak. The old lady sips a little water and slams the glass down on the table, and Luisa jumps. Now the pill, she demands. The old lady turns her head and makes a circle with her lips and leaves Luisa's fingers slimy as she sucks in the pill. She shows her tongue to prove she swallowed it. No doubt, you will need to make a sacrifice, get rid of someone. That's what the hanged man means. Enough with the games, Luisa says. She dusts off her sweater as if dusting off the words of the old lady. Doña Maca bangs the cards against the table and repeats, for the baby to live, someone needs to die. Luisa desperately wants to call Tamara, ask her how she feels, run to the daycare to see how Daniela's doing, but then she sees the old lady hunched over, the effort it takes to lift her cup off the table, and she tells herself she's only instigating. I think I'll get from there. Should I go on?
I want to ask you about what inspired you. When I first read it, I was like, this is really creepy. I love it.
Yeah.
Remember, I was like,
Yes.
whoa.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write this, The Caregiver?
Wow. I don't know if as a writer I believe in inspiration anymore. I don't know if that's fair to say. I think I'm constantly inspired by things I see on a daily, things I hear, but I think most of the work that I do comes from a lot of just work. In terms of sitting there and looking at the page and saying, who is this character? Like, what is going on in this person's life? And it's a fun game for me, but it's also a lot of work, a lot of craft work. So I don't know what was going on in my life at the time that I decided to write such a creepy story, but and I don't know if I have an answer for what inspired it, but I think I just wanted to write something different at the time, and it's different from most of the work that I do. So.
And the work was written in another language.
Yes, it was originally written in Spanish, and I have a good friend, Sylvia Garcia from the University of Houston, who gracefully decided to translate it for me. And I think that process was also very interesting because I love working with translators and trying to just find the right word. And then she sends it back, and I'm like, no, this is not quite telling what I wanted to tell. And there's always work to be done in translation and in writing and editing. We talked about this earlier. I still read this piece, and I'm like, dang it, I should have switched this. I still can edit this. I still can talk about these other things. But sometimes it's also a process of learning when to let go of some pieces as a writer. So, yeah.
I love that you were daring enough to go out of your comfort zone and go into something different.
Yeah.
Was it scary?
It was, I think when I wrote this, I am still pretty naive. But I think I was very naive. When Sandra asked me to participate in the anthology, she's like, would you write something for it, or do you have something? And I was like, okay, I'll write something. And I'm very, very early on in my career, but I was like, okay, I think I can send something new and different and kind of dwell into something. It was almost like an adventure and an opportunity to just, be out there with other friends and colleagues that are working for the book, and it's kind of like having a conversation with other writers within the book. So, yeah, it was a very naive process in that sense. Yeah, thanks for listening, for being here. Should I?
So my title is Telling Tales of a Texas Borderland. And mine, did you say what moon
Did
you're
you say
in?
what moon you're in?
No. Oh wow. Okay, I think I'm in Sinuous Moon. So this lunar energy corresponds to the serpent energy, which is the energy of Mother Earth.
And I'm in the luminous moon. And this moon's energy celebrates the first rays of the sun and the power of coming out of darkness. I know. And we didn't know we were in these moons. When I got the book is when I found out. She actually, Sandra sent me a PDF so I could share with my students. And that's when I was going through it, and I thought, oh, moons. And I found myself in the luminous moon. I don't know why, but okay. And it is really about the land, about Texas. Let's see, where do I begin? Okay. As Tejanas, Tejanos, Tejanes, we walk the paths our ancestors walked and recover the memory of that lies embedded in our DNA. As we weave, quilt, bake, build homes, write poems, tell stories, we are part of a long line of creatives, those whose dreams and imagined futures we are now living. Cantando y bailando in Spanish or English or both. I use Texas with a J so that it is read in Spanish. Why? Because in English, Texas brings forth memories of the racist Anglo who spat dirty spick at me in an elevator in Austin. Texas in English is the white teacher who doubted I had written a paper and the indoctrination in elementary school singing The Eyes of Texas. It's church children pledging to Texas every morning in Texas public schools, even today. But Texas is my mother and her cousins laughing and proudly claiming their tejanidad. Texas is arroz con pollo and enchiladas con chile con carne, as well as enchiladas callejeras. Texas is the sound of the mockingbird and the chicharras on hot summer days. I come from a very specific Texas, South Texas. Our language signals tejanidad. Our Spanish has inklings of older terms, and we also use indigenous terms. For child, we may say chaval, chavalita, or huerco or huerca. Each of these has an etymology in Old Spanish, while other terms for child come from indigenous languages. Escuincle, from the Mexica, Nahuatl, used in Texas, and buki, from the Yaqui, widely used in Arizona. We use espauda for baking powder. Powder, for instance, a clear borrowing from English. Our language is a linguistic mestizaje that suits our discourse needs perfectly. We love to play with words. ¿Qué hace un pez? Nada. ¿Y una manguera? Sells mangoes. Dance also signals tejanidad, both religious and social dance. Do you dance in English? The question surprised me. No, I answered. I'm dancing Tejano, and it doesn't feel as if it's in English. Dancing to Little Joe or Selena, that's dancing Tejano. The Matachines, for certain, don't dance in English. They may dance in Spanish with indigenous elements, though. These folk Catholic sacred dancers who in Laredo honor the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, as Matachines do throughout Mexico, also dance in honor of the Day of the Holy Cross. The stigma of the mainstream that deemed our cultural work as less intellectual, less important, less worthy of study, less interesting, taints the word folklore. After all, the folk are the people, la plebe, not really worthy of study. But folklore is in my genes. It is in the yerbitas, ruda, estafiate, yerbabuena my grandmother would grow in our yard to heal an earache, a stomachache, or a headache. It is in the foods, caldos, sopa, guisados, she and my mom prepared to feed our large family. It is in the celebrations, quinceañeras, bodas, bautizos, marking life stages and bringing community together in mutual respect and mutual assistance. Hoy por ti, mañana por mí, my father would answer when someone thanked him for a favor or for sharing a tool or food. And I think I'll stop here. So.
Beautiful.
What is, I want to talk about your work and what it's like when you were thinking about what to submit, what made you write about Tejas
And folklore.
and folklore?
I have an anthology that's forthcoming, we hope, at FUT Press, University of Texas. It's called Tejanidad, Identity and Experiences, or something like that. Jody Marin, one of my former students, and I are co-editing it. And I was thinking about Tejana and being Tejana and what it means and what it meant for my mother, who was born in Corpus, and my grandmother and her ancestors who were from the border before there was a Texas or a Tejas. And I think that where I got the quote inspiration. I agree with you. I don't believe in inspiration anymore. It just things happen. And there's always stories kind of floating around, and maybe you grab one and you write it, but they're all there in his life. So that's where that came from. I don't think it's finished until I was telling them earlier. This is true of a lot of my work. I never think it's finished. I keep editing and revising. Even as I was reading, I was thinking I should change that. It just never feels like it's done.
I know, I still wanna keep editing the anthology.
And at some point, you have to let it go and just say enough.
Yeah.
I did want to acknowledge the city of Laredo, the public library being here. Thank you for being here and having some swag.
Thank you for inviting us. We're very happy to be here from San Antonio Public Library, and hopefully you can come and visit us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they're co-sponsors of the event, and they have a table out there. So, muchas gracias.
Sí, gracias.
I love librarians. I was telling them earlier, I think librarians have always been on the front lines, especially now with this effort to ban books. And there are several women here who have been banned. Cecilia Vicuña, for instance, was banned in Chile. She came out with a book of poetry, and she decided she wanted to be on the cover naked. And the dictatorship was like, no. And so they banned the book. And Nancy Morejon is Cubana, Afro-Cubana, the great Nancy Morejon, the first Black woman to have won the National Literary Prize in Cuba. And she was recently banned in Paris, at the Paris Poetry Market in June, because she refused to talk shit about, can I say shit? She refused to talk shit about the revolution. She said, you know, with Black people in Cuba, the revolution is a very complicated topic. And for us, for Africans in Cuba, we were able to attain so much more than we had before Batista, and therefore, how am I going to shit on something that gave me and my people an opportunity to eat, an opportunity to go to school, to become doctors and writers? And so for that reason, they banned her. This happened in June. And so I always want to salute librarians. It was where I first became a writer, by becoming a reader.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's una plática, so we are open for questions or comments. Many of you were there last night to hear Sandra introduce Rigoberta Menchú, Dr. Menchú too. So connecting some of what she said yesterday to today, whatever, it's open.
Questions? No questions. Come on. Yes.
More than a question, I just want to thank you for doing this, for writing this. I think growing up, I always sought for a representation of my voice somewhere, and it wasn't. And for you to be able to compile and to bring this get together, you know, for us. It's just really important, not just for me, but for the younger generation, and for them to realize how lucky they are to be able to reach out and get a book like this now. I was talking also to the librarians earlier, and I'm originally from San Antonio, and I remember going to the public library, and the Latino collection was almost non-existent. And the few pieces that were there, we couldn't check out. And so for me to, you know, and I lived in California for 21 years, I just returned about a year and a half ago. And for them to be passing out things about their Latino collection and advertising it is like a huge leap forward. So, you know, as much as we want to, you know, thank our libraries, I think it's writers like you who also hold them accountable by writing those stories and putting it in front of them and challenging them, to make it available to all of us. So, so gracias for your love and your labor in putting this together, and to all the writers.
Thank you.
Sandra, ¿tú naciste en Puerto Rico? ¿Te criaste en Puerto Rico?
Sí. Bueno, yo nací y a los 9 años yo les contesto a los estudiantes. Mi mamá me dijo que íbamos de vacaciones para Nueva York, and it was really New Jersey. And so I'm like, this is New York? I heard it was nicer. And so it was supposed to be for a short summer vacation, and I'm still, I'm not in New Jersey anymore, but I'm still here. I'm back and forth. My first language was love, and my first language was Spanish. I learned English like in 3 months, and I became quickly the family translator. Mm-hmm.
And how was it for you, the transition into living in here instead of there, especially since you didn't know that you were going to do this?
The first transition or this latest
No,
transition?
the first.
The first one, coming here as a young, a
Yes.
little girl, and I come from a small. Monica understands where I'm from, so we're from the south of the Big Island, and it's it's not San Juan. It is magical. The most beautiful beaches are in the south. We're in the Caribbean, and I ate sea grapes along the shores, mangoes ripened from the trees, and aguacates, and I was barefoot all the time, and in the rivers. I mean, it's truly a paradise. And then to come to a place where the language was different, where the culture was different, was very shocking and traumatic, and I yearned to be home all the time. And then when I realized that this was not a vacation, that we were actually going to live in New Jersey, I kind of made the transition to starting to appreciate a place and that was really not fertile. To be a Puerto Rican girl in a place that doesn't really appreciate the same situation, the discrimination, the sexism, the assumption of your brilliance, of not understanding your brilliance was difficult. But here's the thing. My mother is an incredible matriarch, and when I stepped into our home, it was like we were in Puerto Rico. The music, the culture, the language. She always told us, this is not your home. Your home is home. She was never the immigrant that would say, this is your home, you have to forget about, you're now an American. That's not the way she approached. We were here, we're economic exiles. In the 70s, there was an OPEC oil crisis, and there was a lot of movement in the world, and we're part of that movement. And so I will always be eternally grateful to her, the incredible love that she had for her cultura. And we would always be shipped every summer to spend moments and weeks with our abuelas and our tias, our primos. And so that made the transition easier to be going back and forth.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question.
I have a question for Natalia.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you wrote the short story here in Spanish. Is that usually the way you write, or do you
Yeah,
in Spanish and then you have it translated, or?
Yeah, I usually write in Spanish, which I think is a very interesting thing to do in the United States,
Yeah.
right? Because we're usually told, all creative writing programs and graduate schools, MFAs, when you become a writer in the States, it's to be successful, you have to write in English or bilingually in some way. And I think for me, it's just been, that's the language I feel more connected to, and I choose to write in Spanish because there's also a big majority of people in the United States that can read and write in Spanish. So yeah, I usually do that, and I think it can also be a political also a political stance, right? I choose to write in Spanish. There's people that can also read in Spanish. And there's a lot of writers that come from, there's a lot of daughters of Latin America, not only Spanish, but other languages that are writing in the United States. So, yeah.
How old were you when you, or were you born in the U.S. as well?
No, I was born in Mexico, born and raised most of my life, and I moved here for graduate school.
So you learned English as an adult.
I learned English. I think yes and no. No, I think I learned English when I was a kid in Mexico, so in school, and then I moved here, and I also play music, and I attribute languages to music because I think I can pick up accents pretty well. But if you put me in a room with, my accent will start to shift a little. So yeah.
Yeah, I have another question. I'm always interested in how people become who they are now. So this is for the three of you. Was there a moment in your childhood that you decided, I am going to be a writer, or you were writing? I just want to know a little bit, how did you start doing this? I'm a visual artist, and I started drawing when I was 7. So I'm always interested in what, like writers, they're very interesting to me. And so I want to know, how was that for the three of you? Thank you.
You wanna
Both
start?
turn to me.
You wanna start?
As if we practiced.
Yes.
Both turn to me. Yeah, around 7 or 8, 9, I remember writing poems, just writing. I never saw myself as a writer though. And I went all the way through a PhD and all that, and studied writing, but I kept writing. I just never published, or, well, here and there, poemas, or short stories, but I never saw myself as a writer. I was telling Natalia earlier, I saw myself as a teacher who writes. And then when Canicula gets published, then I become a writer who teaches. And that shift, must be psychological. Because then I started seeing myself as a writer and taking it more seriously. It was always there, and you know this, if you get the idea, if you don't write it down, se va. The gods only give it to you, vámonos. So I started paying more attention and being more conscious about being a writer. And also in terms of publishing, I have a lot of stuff I never published. I don't write necessarily to publish, I write it for me. But after Canicula, I kind of shifted that. And I can tell you as an academic, more people have read and know about Canicula than all my academic work. So I guess I started seeing myself as a writer when I published like that.
Should I go? Okay. I have a similar experience. I think I started writing when I was maybe 7 or 8. But I think I started rewriting first. And what that means is I didn't like we had this government books that they would give you in la primaria, right? And I didn't like the stories that came in there. They were like history books, and then they had like little stories, and I would rewrite those as a way, maybe it was like my rebellious me, in a way, guiding me through my writing journey. And I don't come from a family of writers or anyone is in the arts, so I think I grew up in Puebla, which is not very cultural.
Puebla.
Yes, and if anyone's from Puebla, I'm sorry I said that. So I never saw writing as a possibility for life. I always saw it like as something that I would have to do on the side almost, and I think this is true for a lot of writers. And there was always this thing inside of me. So I went through my master's degree in literature and then a PhD like Norma. It's like I want to write, but then how do you do that? So I was always walking, it was almost like a parallel line with literature, but not writing. And I think I entered the writing world pretty old. I see most writers enter the writing world when they're 17, 18, they start kind of dwelling into writing. And for me, I think it was in the past few years that I decided I actually really want to do this. So the same shift from being a teacher to first being a writer, because I feel that's more important, and then I can be more present for my students in other ways. So yeah, that's my journey.
I love your stories. They're so beautiful. They remind me of Toni Morrison. If you haven't seen the documentary, I produced a documentary of someone who just completely changed my life. Toni Morrison. It's called The Pieces I Am, and it's in I think it may be on Hulu or Netflix or one of those streaming services. The Pieces I Am, and it's a really beautiful, I think, a beautiful time with Toni and all the luminaries who love her work and explain her work. But she said she didn't consider herself a writer. She started at 39, so by the way, and that's pretty old, right? Which is like some ageism is just ridiculous, right? But she said that she didn't consider herself a writer until her third novel, which is pretty incredible. I started writing when I was 10 years old, and I started writing in diaries. I used to buy these little diaries, and then they had little locks, so nobody would, read them. And so I would write poetry. I would write the crushes I had, or I would write I hate my mother, just the drama of the family. I would create stories, and I did this for a very long time. I was a serious diarist. Like Anais Nin is in the book. Anais Nin is an erotica writer, and she's Cubana and French, and she's I think she may be the only woman in the world that kept a diary since she was 11 years old until the moment she passed away. And so every single moment, cycle that she lived is in these journals.
I know.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And the journals that I chose to publish where she talks shit about Henry Miller, which I thought that was really cool. And she's having a conversation about her mother, who's like scandalized because one of the cousins is queer, and she's living in this queer section of France. So it's really, journaling and diaries are really beautiful. So that was my entryway into writing, the writing life. And I come from a long line of storytellers, oral, literary brilliance. And so I have a mother and aunts and uncles, and they're the best and most exquisite storytellers. Right, Monica? Like, we come from Puerto Ricans can really tell stories. And so, writing just became an extension of telling, of, the physical expression of putting the oral stories on paper. And I'll say one more thing. In Boriquen, we have rock books. The archaeologists call them petroglyphs, but they're like more than 35. I think it's more, Boriquen has more rock books than any other place in the Caribbean. When I look at these books that our ancestors left on stones, I'm just, I marvel. And so that's the lineage.
I have a question. I'm still not sure what to emphasize. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not sure how to formulate it. But I think I'm gonna share first my story, and then maybe I will explain where the question is arising from. I was born in Cuba, but I left when I was like 2 years old. This is in the 90s, so living was a lie. There was no coming back home. There was no calling anyone. And my parents, they were gone to Moscow, right? So Moscow, for historical reasons. They stopped in Madrid, and they were like, "This is it. We're not going in any of the other places." But since anything that was new, I that moment it was better than what was back. They went to one of the worst places. Well, not worst, I guess it depends. When you're a kid, it was one of the best places. They went to the south, in a place there was no employment, no education, no nothing. But I was, my childhood is very similar to yours in that I was barefoot. I was all the time in the beach. I was having a blast. In fact, when, unfortunately we had to move, we kind of like went along the coast. We moved like 2 years in one place, 2 years in another. I still have a lot of shocking introducing myself to others because it's just, you know, you make friends and then you forget about them. The point is that when I would go back, well, finally, when I could come to the US, by the way, I've never been to Cuba. When I came to the US, right, I have some family here, everyone's in Miami, and they always saw me as something else, right? Like, you're one of us, but you're like one of those lost children. And I feel it in the, I don't know how to say it, like the culture doesn't match, right? We don't listen to the same music, we don't express ourselves. There's a lot of love, but it doesn't connect. But when I'm in Spain, I'm nothing else but a Cuban. Even when I haven't seen anything else than Spain. Worst of all is that Spain is so regionalist that even when I'm in, let's say that I'm in Valencia, it's very hard for me to say I'm from Valencia. So it doesn't matter where I am. I always feel fake saying I am from this. It's like I'm not making justice to all of the rivers that convert to me. So the question is kind of similar to identity in the writer. How do you feel when you have to say I am from or I am this? And I don't know, it feels like I need to give my whole resume to be comfortable saying this is what I am.
I'll start. I don't have any problem saying I'm Tejana. And in España especially, people don't understand what that means. And often, because you're from the United States, the expectation is one thing, and then the reality is another. And of course, all the stereotypes about Texas and the assumptions come forth. And the first time that happened, the first time I was called a gringa was actually in Mexico. And I was shocked, because I'm not a gringa, I don't consider myself a gringa. But it was indigenous people seeing these Norteamericanos coming down the hill, because we missed our bus in Monte Alban. And they said, ahí vienen los gringos. You know, they saw us as gringos. And that was a shock, because how you see yourself and how others see you. And it was a revelation. So, flash forward, I'm in Spain, and the racism I didn't expect. I mean, I kind of had I didn't want to go there, but I did, como adrede, like, what you don't want to do is what you do, and what you don't want to write about is what you write about, because that's pushing it, right? And I was on a Fulbright doing research on the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid, and people saw me as exotic and other. They didn't know what to do with me, but I didn't see myself like that. I didn't see myself necessarily aligned con los Norteamericanos, which were mostly blonde and blue-eyed scholars that I was with, Fulbright, or Mexicana, because I'm not Mexicana, I'm Texas. So all of that identity issue, I think, surfaces situationally, wherever you are. It depends, it manifests itself differently for me. Here in San Antonio is probably where I feel most at home. Even in Laredo, ya me pierdo. And I was born there, and I was born in Nuevo Laredo, which is another story. I'm the oldest of 11, and my mother is from Texas, my dad from Mexico, and they happened to be in Nuevo Laredo when I was born, so I nací. So there's this image of the immigrant, which I've never felt I was an immigrant. So I understand what you're saying, and how do you give the whole genealogy to somebody who's saying, where are you from? ¿Verdad?
I really hope you one day get to go to Cuba. It is such a beautiful, beautiful place. I've been there many times, and I love Cubanos. It's rich in cultura. You're going soon, right?
I am in February.
It's really stunning, and I pray and I hope that one day you get to go, because
maybe when you land, you'll be like, I'm home, I'm home. When you smell that beautiful, you know, tropical air, and when you hear the accents and you see the diversity, you experience the music, and it's just a stunning place. You know, for me, because I was raised by an indigenous matriarch who reminded me as much as she could that I was from a specific place. I have always felt rooted when I'm in the Caribbean, when I'm in Puerto Rico. But when I was in college, I was lost. You know, I didn't feel like, you know, I wanted to belong, and belonging was very difficult in a place that didn't have many Puerto Ricans, many Latinos, I suffered greatly. I write about it in a book called the Latinas Bible, which is a nonfiction book for Latinas, and I feel like a lot of immigrant Latinas and, you know, first, second, third generation Latinas feel this place of displacement. Yeah, I feel like whenever I felt I was displaced, just going to Jersey City, New Jersey, and in my mother's home, I just felt that was home, you know. And I just want to add one more thing, because I'm indigenous. There's this like myth that has been promoted that when Columbus landed, all stinky in the Caribe, that 15 years later that we were exterminated. Like, they actually teach that in the schools, that Tainos and Tainas were exterminated. So when people say, you know, when they ask me where you're from, I am very clear of stating my indigeneity, because for me it's like establishing that we're not dead, right? Because they're like, you look Hawaiian, you know, you look like, they can't really place who I am. So I hear you. I totally hear you. I understand you and I see you. Thank you for your question.
That's yeah. Identity, I think, is something we all struggle with. It's a journey, I think, and it really depends on where we are in our lives and where we are geographically and where we are in our hearts, or who we are with. And I think I was trying to think about this because I don't have the same experience, because I immigrated to the United States when I was older. So in theory, I guess my identity would be tied to I am Mexican. There's no question about it. But then again, when people say you're Mexican, I'm like, am I really? You know? And not because I want to say I wasn't born there or raised there or I have family there, of course. But first of all, not everyone in Mexico is the same. So whatever that means. And I think this thing that I struggle with most, and we were talking about this at some point, is how once you enter the United States, you are, yes, of course, a Mexican with all of the stereotypes that carries, but also you become a Hispanic, whatever that means. And for me, I think that was the most shocking thing, where I was like, I don't know what that is, and I don't want to take on that label, please. And that's my main struggle, I think, usually when they're like, you're Hispanic, you're Latina, I'm like, I'm so many other things first, maybe, and I want to be able to decide if I put on or don't put on that label. But unfortunately, we live in a social world, and we constantly have to, you know, deal with those labels. So I also hear you, and I don't have the same experience as a lot of people in the room, but I hope that you are able to find your home in you know, whatever that means for you. Yeah.
But as you know, we're going to have a solar eclipse. So
And the eclipse, is it gonna be in April, the band? Oh, but there's gonna be a band, you know that there's gonna be like that, and San Antonio is in the band? Where, October 14th? Wait, I thought it was in April.
There's two.
There's another one in here.
Okay, cause I wanna come for that one. Yeah, I wanna be here for that one, I can't be here for the October 14th. I love that you mentioned the sun. I don't know if you were here, if you were there last night, for Dr. Rigoberta Menchutum's conversation, but she mentioned that, the sun is very important for the Maya. In fact, she says, and I've been practicing this for the past couple of months and it changed my life. I try to, in as much as I can, before I look at the phone, before I do anything else, to look at the sun for a few minutes. And the sun reaches your pineal gland, which is otherwise known as your third eye, and it actually adjusts, it helps you. It gives you energy, and I salute it, and it's really beautiful. What is next for me? Well, I do want to launch a podcast of Daughters of Latin America. I want to go into deep conversations with the writers. I think that would be really fun, right? I do want to do that, so I'm raising funds. I also want to raise funds to bring all of the women that are in the anthology together into a summit and have like, you know, a day of like, yes, a party, a day of readings, a marathon. So that's, I get goosebumps. If we can like, you know, lift our voices, that would be truly a special moment for us. And then personally, as a writer, I'm working on a memoir. I've been working on a memoir for a really long time. So no more anthologies for me. I wanna delve into the work, and I wanna launch a line of Taino memories. So I wanna publish Taino stories, the old ladies who have all that medicina, the jibaras and the jibaros. So that's, you know, that's what I'm gonna be doing for the rest of my life, devoting my time to its indigenous recovery. Yeah. Yeah. I will call on you guys for help. Anybody else want to take that up?
I don't know. I mean, I'm working on a big project, on a book, and right now all my energy is going into it. And it's I mean, books take a long time to process, and for me it's been a process of going back to my childhood a lot. So, as you can imagine, that takes some energy and time and emotional energy. So for me, that's what I could see in the forecast for a little while, and trying to enjoy life as much as I can. What about you, Norma?
I was talking to you about all the different projects. I have a lot of irons in the fire, but they're all about writing or anthologizing. I have 4 anthologies that I'm
I know.
working on simultaneously. I know. But I was asking you about the spirituality part of it. For example, I'm doing one with Olga Nájera Ramirez, who's a scholar of folklorico dance, and it's on folklorico. We had a symposium here at Trinity a year ago, and so the speakers gave us their papers. Some of them are practitioners, dancers, some of them are teachers, they have their studios, and some of them are scholars of dance. And that's almost actually sent it to University of Illinois Press. So, por ahora, it'll come back with revisions and all that. Another one is on Tecanidad that Jody, I mentioned earlier, Jody and I are working on for UT Press, and that's, I think, 40 authors. I think crazy, not like yours, but a lot. The other one is only 80. And then there's an anthology. And then I have my creative work. I have a collection of poetry called Remedios. So I'm writing poems. On some level, they're recovering remedios for earache or remedio for heartache. And some of them are more like remedio for homophobia. And these things. So I'm having a lot of fun with that one. I'm also working on a collection called Elemental Tareas Horas Elementales, but they're about the elements in the periodic table. So I have about maybe 20 of those done, and there's 117. So it's gonna take a while. But they just come, and that's, somebody asked me, how can you work on several? I read several books at once, so I also write several books at once. And I'm working with Viviana on the children's book. It's an alphabet book, and she's doing the artwork, and I'm doing the little things. It's a beautiful project.
A children's illustrated
Yeah.
book
The alphabet.
on the alphabet,
But
what
it's
about the alphabet?
but it's so the words can be in both Spanish and English, and she also has the sign for it. And the artwork is amazing. We don't have a lot of it done yet. It's an ongoing project. Yeah, and then of course just life. I mean, the
Yeah.
teaching, the traveling, all of the other things that are there. Oh yeah, I'm going, the Camino de Santiago book is there. I walked the Camino de Santiago 500 miles 12 years ago now. And it was amazing. And then I wrote a blog a year later that's on WordPress. And then that blog became a book, but I wasn't quite finished, and then COVID happened. And I realized that this book was missing, so I went back to Santiago. I didn't walk the whole thing, but I walked 300 miles. And went back to it. It's there. I haven't finished it yet. It's done, but it isn't. And I cannot tell you why. You know what I mean? It has to be organic. It comes from the work itself. I'm going back in spring with my students. I'm taking 12 students. Sarah Kinam from the department here in religious studies, and I are taking the students to walk. It's only the last part because it's spring break, but that's gonna influence how I write this too. So these are all the different projects. I'm 76, so I don't have a lot of time. I keep thinking, oh, yeah, it's coming up on me. So I think I'm finishing these projects. I'm not gonna start any new ones. I'm gonna just finish what I have on the plate right now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm inspired by all of the fires you have going and all of the work that you're doing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It is what it is. Thank you all for being here.
They
probably have homework.
There's only 2 here. Any questions?
Okay, you talked briefly about how Natalia, that you've always felt that maybe writing was going to be something that was on the side. Whenever you mentioned that, I'm a poet and I love poetry and prose and slam poetry, and I've always thought it to be a hobby. And even right now, I send some of my writing and my poems to the Somos magazine in Brown University, and even here I'm involved in the Trinity review. And I still to this day feel like my writing, it's developing, but it always feels like it's on the side. And I once mentioned it to my parents, my mom. I was like, I want to do social justice, I want to be a lawyer, but can I publish? Can I still be a writer? And she said, you can do anything you want to do, but it's always coming back to the identity in writing. And I end up doing Spanglish, a lot of writing. And some people that have read my pieces, or when I send them, they're like, pick a language. Is there any advice?
Get rid of your friends who tell you to pick a language. Be my first advice.
Yes.
I think it's, thank you for that question and for your openness and your vulnerability. I think you can do both. I don't think it's gonna be easy, and that's okay. I think for me at least, there was a moment, I don't know if this happened to you guys, I don't know when in my life I was like, yeah, I can actually do this. And I think it was when I finally first one big thing or project, when I birthed something and it saw the light of day, and then I was like, oh, okay, I think I could do this. I'm trying to think of good advice to give a young fellow writer, but
I can tell you, if it's your passion, you won't choose it will choose you. You're gonna always write. And yes, it can be done, it's not gonna be easy. But other lawyers have been writing, and doctors who become poets, I mean, it's doable, but it's not easy. And look who's talking. I mean, I'm a professor and I write. So it's not one or the other. It's very few people who can choose to be writers and nothing else. First of all, because you need money to eat. Yeah, you need the money. And then the other part for me is my teaching is also part of my mission, just like my writing is. So it's hard to not do one or the other.
And then I think they can, when I said you don't have to choose one or the other, I guess it's, you want to be a lawyer and you want to be an advocate, that will also influence your writing. You know, all of the things that you experience will influence your writing. And what you write will influence what you do as well. So it's, yeah, it just happens that way. I don't think you should choose a language either. I think you can, I mean, so many people are doing wonderful bilingual work, and there are readers for that, there are spaces for that, so I think it's just finding that space.
Finding your tribe. I would say find your tribe. It's important to surround yourself with people who have, you know, it doesn't have to be a whole room full of people, a couple of friends that you can bounce ideas on. And I would also suggest that you read, because reading informs so much, right? And it's a very beautiful space to meet writers as a reader.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your question.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyone else?
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.